They said, no, that's where I draw the line. Would you draw a line on something like that?
So if you look at some of the things that's been going on just recently, of course, the reality is we have, in my opinion, which is just my opinion, and nobody really comes to me to run social conditions in America, but the fact is a lot of what goes on university campuses today is largely deplorable.
And you would not endorse that financially or otherwise.
Right, exactly. I mean, the reality is some of this stuff, from my younger years, if you'd said this stuff would happen, you'd say, no, that can't happen. This is America.
So Ken Fisher is a very successful billionaire and obviously has a lot of good principles on how business works. Look what he says about fancy schools, the most expensive schools. A person must remember, if you do not have the money or the ability to go to these schools, this does not mean you won't achieve your goals or be a success. It depends on work ethic, how you apply yourself, how you overcome challenges, how much harder and smarter you work than other people. Money is made in the business sector, not by graduates getting a fancy degree.
So Ken, the reason why I want to pursue this a little more with you, this idea where some are saying, I would never hire someone from Harvard as a result of this. Do you think that goes too far?
No. So, when I was a kid, I was a California public school person all the way through. And I had a policy in my firm when I was very young, or first starting, where we were right up the road from Stanford University, and we had a formal policy discriminating against Stanford grads. I've never been in favor of fancy school. I've always been in favor of the kids that had to work their way through hard and deal with the school's tough knocks, and people that worked their way through school and all that stuff. I've always shied away from fancy schools, always.
But you wouldn't not hire someone just because they come from a fancy school?
Oh, again, I want to go back to my point.
Okay.
Neil, I said this a couple minutes ago. We had a formal policy against hiring people from Stanford a long time ago.
Okay.
Now, mind you, if we'd been next to Harvard, we would have had a formal policy against hiring them. And the reality is we've hired some of those people, but in my opinion, going to a fancy school, a fancy name school, actually is an impediment to future success in terms of the bigger feature, which is getting ahead in life, is really more about work ethic, common sense, drive, and all that stuff than it is about where you go to school. Where you go to school fits on a resume. What you do after the resume's done is really a whole different thing. It's more about the difference between will do and can do. Can do is what in theory you can do. Will do is what you get done.
All right. Well, what do you know? You're only a multi-billionaire, but a very, very wise comments all around. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas and appreciate it.
You too, Neil. Thanks. I've never been in favor of fancy school. I've always been in favor of the kids that had to work their way through hard and deal with the school's tough knocks, and people that worked their way through school and all that stuff. I've always shied away from fancy schools, always.
But you wouldn't not hire someone just because they come from a fancy school?
Oh, again, I want to go back to my point.
Okay.
Neil, I said this a couple minutes ago. We had a formal policy against hiring people from Stanford a long time ago.
Okay.
Now, mind you, if we'd been next to Harvard, we would have had a formal policy against hiring them. And the reality is we've hired some of those people, but in my opinion, going to a fancy school, a fancy name school, actually is an impediment to future success in terms of the bigger feature, which is getting ahead in life, is really more about work ethic, common sense, drive, and all that stuff than it is about where you go to school. Where you go to school fits on a resume. What you do after the resume's done is really a whole different thing. It's more about the difference between will do and can do. Can do is what in theory you can do. Will do is what you get done.
All right. Well, what do you know? You're only a multi-billionaire, but a very, very wise comments all around. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas and appreciate it.
You too, Neil. Thanks.
Look at this amazing story about Mrs. B that sold her business to Warren Buffett, the famous investor. I think she sold it for $55 million. Some of the comments is $60 million, some 55, I think some 50. It just depends how Her family retained, I think, 10 or 20%, so sometimes they equate it as the whole business or just Warren Buffett's share. But anyway, let's make it 55 million. I mean, that is about 1.1 billion rand. And the amazing thing is she never went to school and she couldn't read or write, but she could do business. Don't let that your family or your situation where you didn't have money to go to fancy schools hold you back.
There's a story of a woman who turned a $500 investment into $60 million. Her name was Rose Blumkin, historically known as Mrs. B. Mrs. B was a Russian Jewish immigrant who left Russia and landed in Seattle in 1917. She couldn't speak a lick of English and was struggling to learn the language. After shortly living in Fort Dodge, Iowa, she moved to Omaha, Nebraska because there were other Russian Jews there, and at least she would have someone to talk to. She eventually learned English by having her 4 children teach her what they would learn at school when they returned home every day. Although she never attended a day of school in her life, Mrs. B was thrifty. She found ways to make money selling used clothing and other items, and she lived like a peasant, aggressively saving her money. By 1937, she had saved up $500. She got on a train, went out to Chicago to the American Furniture Mart. Now, Mrs. B didn't go out there for a shopping spree. She went out there with intent and purpose. She purchased about $2,000 worth of merchandise. She worried the entire train ride home, thinking how she would pay off that $1,500 that she owed, purchasing $2,000 worth of goods and only having $500 worth of equity. When Mrs. B returned to Omaha, she opened the Nebraska Furniture Mart. Her motto, still listed on the company website today: sell cheap and tell the truth. And selling cheap was something she did well, really well. Nebraska Furniture Mart grew to be a local monopoly. With more than 450,000 square feet of retail space and 1 million square feet in warehouse space, it was able to stomp out the competition in both merchandise selection and price. The company was simply able to buy in such large quantities that it commanded deep discounts from manufacturers.
On his 53rd birthday, he walked in here, asked what she wanted for the place. She named a price. He said, okay.
And we never took an audit. We never checked the inventory. We never verified the receivables because she gave me her word, and I gave her the $55 million. And when you got Mrs. B's word, you've got something like a document from the Bank of England.
$55 million.
If I could start a business and I had first draft pick, like in the NFL, of the 25 top graduates of the top business schools in the country and the 25 picks from the top CEOs of the Fortune 500, or I could take Mrs. B to run the business, I'd take Mrs. B. There aren't any other Mrs. B's. Mrs. B is incapable of operating at less than 100%. I mean, she has no low gear or no medium gear. She's got high gear, and she is in it all the time. It's the largest home furnishing store in the world. In Omaha, which only has a SMSA of 650,000 people, it's on 72 acres. That business comes about, or has resulted, from an investment of $500 in 1937 by a woman who walked out of Russia in 1921. She walked out, got on a peanut boat, landed in Seattle with a tag around her neck. She couldn't speak one word of English, so she came to Omaha because there were other Russian Jews there and she'd at least have somebody to talk to. Her little girl started school, Frances. Frances would come home at night and teach her mother the words she learned in school that day. That's how this woman, Rose Blumkin, learned the English language. She took that business and built it from that start. No one would sell to her. She went into court 4 times because the carpet manufacturers tried to keep her from selling at a discount, and she went into court and told the judge, I pay $3 a yard for this carpet. Brandeis sells it for $6.98. She says, I sell it for $3.98. Just tell me, Judge, how much you want me to rob people. She defended herself. Papers wrote it up. The judge bought carpet from her the next day. I mean, it was marvelous. Brandeis isn't selling anymore. They were the huge department store in Omaha. She put everybody out of business. She'd never seen a balance sheet. She didn't know what accounting terms meant, but she understood the nature of the business. And she worked till she was 103. She died at 104. She had 3 siblings at her funeral. I mean, those are some genes. Her son works there now. He's 82 or 3, and the 3 sisters are all alive. But the punchline is, she couldn't read or write. This woman could not read or write. If you told her this room was 68 feet by 43, she would tell you how many square yards it was like that. She never went to school a day in her life.
I'm going to give you a bag of VSQ $9.95. My price is $6.50.
$6.50?
They don't have fashion floor, my prices.
Okay,
They don't
I
have the
agree with
stock
that.
and they don't have the looks.
That's why I'm here.
Mrs. B runs the largest, the most successful retail furniture store in the country. Sales last year alone were over $125 million.
I'm the best operator, not I'm bragging, in the country with common sense. I don't know education, books, percentage. I use the old-fashioned way. Tell the truth, buy right, sell cheap.
In 1983, she sold a 90% share in her store. The buyer, self-made Nebraska billionaire Warren Buffett. The price, $55 million. And there is nothing like the Nebraska Furniture Mart. It has to be seen to be believed. It is tremendous. It stretches north, south, east, and west, covering over 40 acres. And its low prices have wiped out the competition. Her store is the realization of a vow spoken long ago. Mrs. B has never forgotten her mother's desperate struggle.
One night, I woke up 6 o'clock, she was mixing bread. I said, I can't stand that, you work awful hard. When I'll grow up, I'll go to a big town and find a job, make money and go to America.
And she came, full of nerve and energy.
It's Mrs. B's 92nd birthday at Nebraska Furniture Mart.
At 92, it's still all there.
Something where they'll remember for a long time. I hope till the next birthday they'll still remember the bugs.
Even though Mrs. B no longer owns the store, she still puts in over 70 hours a week, working all 7 days and 3 nights. And vacation is a dirty word. Her daughter Frances puts it another way.
It's oxygen for her. It's that challenge. She's like a fighter in the ring, and she likes to spar and she likes to negotiate.
Everything is in you. God bless me. I had a talent. Anything I done, I made money. I'll come in and shake hands and buy the store, unexpectedly. That quick in 2 words. He asked me how much I won. I told him, and he says, okay, let's shake hands. You got the deal.
When did that happen?
Just a week ago.
It happened on my birthday, Bob.
Yeah, and I told him he struck oil. He said, on your birthday, you struck oil.
So you weren't really out looking for a buyer then?
I was, somebody offered, I say, okay, I'll talk to you. So they look, and they think, and they decide. No, not like Mr. Buffett. It's 1 in a million.
What's your interest, Mr. Buffett? Why do you see Nebraska Furniture Mart as an investment?
He offered me 20 years ago to buy it.
That's right. It's a one-of-a-kind business, and it's run by a one-of-a-kind manager, and you don't get any other opportunities like that. You had attempted? You'd have to be a fool not to go into business with Mrs. B, I'll tell you that. You had attempted to buy it 20 years ago? Long time ago. Yes, close to 20 years.
He called me up one time. I said, you too cheap. That time he didn't go on to give me my price.
I made a mistake. Have you made offers since then also?
No, never. Never. Never approached. And when they say award is good as gold all over the United States, they never back out on anything. Award is award, not only one, all my kids, my son, my son-in-laws, my daughters, when they say something, he said.
I'd like to elaborate on that. This purchase is being made without any audit whatsoever being made of the books or the inventory or anything about this business, and that's absolutely unheard of in business to make a deal.
It is right.
And I would frankly rather have Mrs. B's word than the opinion of all of the Big 8 auditors. That's how I feel about it. So there's no audit being done. It's like dealing with the Bank of England.
Very nice. I appreciate it.
Mr. Buffett, do you plan any expansion, perhaps?
Absolutely. We'll try to grow bigger and bigger. Bigger and better.
Mrs. B is going to make a hero out of it.
We got 45-acre land. We could build more buildings and everything. Such a pleasure. You know, a lot of parents don't get along with kids. And my kids are the best.
I guess my question still is, do you have any
You're not
expansion
broke.
plans or franchise plans to other states or anything along that line?
Maybe.
We'll run it just like Mrs. B wants to run it.
You're being awfully non-committal.
No, I'm
Joe.
not. I'm committing myself 100%. That's exactly how I feel about it.
So whatever Mrs. Blumpkin and family says goes as far as you're concerned.
If they could take $500 and create this out of it, I'm perfectly willing to let them keep playing the hand.
Mr. Buffett, just what has been your relationship with the Blumpkin family for you to be so trusting to just say, okay, I'll buy it without an audit, without an investigation?
I've observed and admired this operation for I don't know how long, but a long, long, long time. And believe me, you can tell the difference between people that do things right and mean what they say and people that don't. And you can draw up a 500-page contract with the wrong kind of people that doesn't do you any good, and you don't need anything with somebody like Mrs. B and the whole family. It's that simple. And people don't understand that if they haven't really been around in business to some extent, but I can tell you that's the case.
Were you paid in cash or Berkshire Hathaway stock?
Yeah, they're going to pay us, no, cash.
Cash.
No stock, I don't take stock.
She likes cash.
I believe in cash. I don't like stock.
Makes things simple.
I like big business.
Who did those agents represent? Other furniture companies?
No. Levitz one time came and bought and agreed everything. Then they're going to give me stock, and I said to a guy, if you could change your wife for a 20-year-old girl, I don't trust you. I want cash.
Mr. Buffett, would you and Mrs. B recreate the handshake?
Last time it cost me a lot of money.
Okay, Mom. I think that'll be it. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Appreciate it.
And she worked till she was 103. She died at 104. She had 3 siblings at her funeral. Her son works there now. He's 82 or 3, and the 3 sisters are all alive. But the punchline is she couldn't read or write. This woman could not read or write. If you told her this room was 68 feet by 43, she would tell you how many square yards it was like that. She never went to school a day in her life.
If I could start a business and I had first draft pick, like in the NFL, of the 25 top graduates of the top business schools in the country and the 25 picks from the top CEOs of the Fortune 500, or I could take Mrs. B to run the business, I'd take Mrs. B. There aren't any other Mrs. B's.
There is a market out there for nearly anything. Work, save some capital, self-educate yourself, and if you come up with a business or investment idea, don't be afraid to take a shot at it. There's a great quote that goes, "Formal education will make you a living, self-education will make you a fortune." Mrs. B couldn't even read or write, but she was highly skilled when it came to business. So what ideas can you come up with? How can you turn a small sum of money into a potential fortune?